Om Ajnana-timirandasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Narayana Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudire. Hare Krishna. So we are continuing our discussion of Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto. And in today's class, the previous class, in fact, was our touching upon the Chatushloki of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And the idea was for us to examine the four important verses given in the Bhagavad Gita, which relate to Sambandha Gyan. And we also wanted to do that before we come to chapter 9 of the second canto, because chapter 9 of the second canto primarily focuses on Krishna Sambandha. The Chatushloki of Srimad Bhagavatam is within chapter 9 of second canto. What is important is that the whole of second canto is where there is a very gradual step-by-step progression in Sambandha. And it is first where Lord Brahma himself is searching for answers, and then he is asked to meditate on the universal form. So the universal form is a material manifestation of the three modes of material nature, but it has the personification of the Lord, which is actually quite accurately described in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as well. This is primarily the manifestation of the Lord as the time factor and the three modes of material nature and everything that is included within the three modes of material nature. So the fact is that the universal form is a depiction of the Lord, that he is practically the fundamental controller of everything that happens in the creation. So that is basically the message that is driven home. Now, the second part is where we come in touch with the super soul. So there was a brief discussion in the second chapter of second canto where we spoke about the super soul and the process of purification that is basically connected to meditation on the super soul, which requires preparation, specifically using the process of yoga. Now, the process of yoga, purification of the psychic or the ethereal body, which is the purification of the chakras, and etc. So that was what was focused on. The idea was for us to be able to control the senses so that the practitioner could focus on the appearance of the Lord within the heart as the super soul. Now, in the first instance of meditating on Krishna as the universal form, there can't be service. There can be an understanding of Sambandha that he is in charge. In the second instance, as a super soul, there's a deeper understanding that he is within everybody and he is in his expansion as a super soul. Now, even in the case with the yogis, there cannot be service because you're meditating on the super soul. So there is the ability to visualize, there is the ability to basically have darshan, so that it's a very deep impression of faith, but you're not rendering service, you're meditating. Now, the third part of it was where the distinction was made between pure devotional service versus Mishra Bhakti. Pure devotional service essentially is not contaminated by motivations for fruitive results. In other words, one doesn't approach Krishna for the purpose of gaining something. That is encouraged. In other words, there is encouragement that you should approach Krishna for everything. But one is not encouraged to approach Krishna for fruitive results if the objective itself is to develop a deep relationship with him, because then it becomes a transaction. The motivation of the fruitive results, say for example, someone wanting to achieve things in the world, that motivation becomes bigger than Krishna himself, where Krishna becomes the means to an end. And as a consequence, Karma Kanda, or rather Karma Mishra Bhakti, practically delineates the position of the Lord to second tier. The first tier is the karma itself. I want to achieve something in the world, Krishna, and you are an instrument. Now the Lord becomes secondary and the achievement of karma becomes primary. So that's why it's Mishra Bhakti, mixed devotional service. Yes, there is chanting, yes, there is puja, there's all of that is happening, but then it is tainted and contaminated with objectives where the objective is bigger than the Lord. Because once the objective is attained, then more or less the Lord will disappear. In other words, the objective becomes primary. There are instances in Srimad Bhagavatam that talk about that feature as well, where it explains how people come in touch with Krishna for attaining results, and then Krishna appears, gives them the results, and then that's over. They're going about doing what they wanted to do. Now, the third category is Jnana Mishra Bhakti. Jnana Mishra Bhakti is wanting to basically be situated in the spiritual sky, but even being situated in the spiritual sky is basically doesn't give an opportunity or motivation to develop a relationship. So there is sambandha which is tainted even here, because there is a motivation for being liberated from matter, because one has recognized that it is troublesome and they want to leave. Now, this is also condemned, and then we are basically looking at the fact that pure devotional service can't have either of these objectives. One is to be liberated. So moksha is not an objective of devotional service. Very few people understand this until much later when they come into devotional service, because most of us, as devotees, especially if you're born in the Indian subcontinent, they have exposure to devotional service through family tradition. And they keep hearing about the wonderful quality of moksha, which is liberation. As a consequence, they believe that the goal of life is moksha. Now, the acharyas in our line, Srila Rupa Goswami's line, Rupanugas, they are very clear that moksha is not an objective. And they are saying that Jnana Mishra Bhakti, which is a contamination of pure bhakti, is also having the objective of moksha. As a consequence, we are literally desiring to be relieved of suffering in this world. And Krishna is secondary, and Krishna becomes a vehicle for purification. This is also a practice used by the Mayavadis. And I've spoken about it several times to distinguish that deity worship done purely for the objective of purification is nothing but what is done by the Mayavadis. So you will find Radha Krishna deities in the homes of those who are practicing impersonal worship. They will worship the deities, and then they would worship the deities with, for example, incense to purify the Vayu Tattva. They will worship the deities with lamp to purify the Agni Tattva. Ultimately, when there is so much purification that has already been done and karma has been burnt away and they are relieved of karmic reactions, the deity becomes secondary because there is no sambandha. So Radha Krishna deities, in their own assumption, are also matter. You see, there's no eternal conception of the fact that the Radha Krishna deities are non-different from Radha and Krishna in the spiritual sky. So there really is a challenge if we don't understand this. That's why I'm emphasizing it again, that in deity worship, we also use this word purification quite often in our movement, and we should be very careful in understanding what is the objective of purification. For us, purification essentially means being able to serve Krishna with the complete understanding of our relationship. That is purification. So we are not contaminated by the different identities that we assume in this world, but have a clear understanding of our identity in the spiritual sky and are engaging in pure devotional service. So we have to be very careful in understanding the word purification, because we use the word pure devotee. We use the word purification quite often. And sometimes what does happen is that the meaning becomes quite obscure as we use it quite often, saying that becomes an objective, or purification is an objective. Purification is not the objective of the Hare Krishna movement. Purification is a means to an end. The end is prema, falling in love. Falling in love requires one to understand themselves, one to understand the object of love, and one to engage in service. So for us, the objective is far greater. It is to develop a relationship. It is not to purify ourselves. Purification is basically the idea of liberation. Purification is necessary to be free from matter. And for us to be free from matter essentially means that the material identities that we have assumed in this world of being a father, mother, professional, son, daughter, etc., all of these identities, they don't dominate to such an extent that they take on center stage in our pursuit of bhakti. This is the whole idea of purification. Krishna needs to come to the center because he is basically the object of all activities in this particular world. He is basically the whole purpose of our existence. As a consequence, he needs to come to the center, while every other relationship has to be understood through the relationship with Krishna. So Krishna basically will be the catalyst, or rather Krishna basically is the idea, the central idea, central theme through which we can understand everything else around us. So this is very important for us to understand that for us, purification essentially means that we are freed from the misconceptions of identity in this world, and we are establishing ourselves in the identity, the sambandha of being connected to Krishna in Vraja. Because this gift of Vraja is not given by the other sampradayas. It is not given as distinctly as given by the Rupanugas. It is not given by the other sampradayas. The gift of Vraja, especially the worship of Srimati Radharani and Krishna together, this is not given by the other sampradayas. You will not even find it in scripture. You will not find it in the four sampradayas openly being discussed. Neither will you find Srimati Radharani's name being spoken of openly in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The point which I'm trying to make here is what is being given to us by Srila Rupa Goswami, the followers of Lord Chaitanya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, is so confidential that it is not available for consumption in the other sampradayas. So this is something that we need to remember, that for us, the objective is not purification. Purification essentially, for us, purification means we are freeing ourselves from material conceptions and identities that we have established in this world, and we are focusing on our Nitya Sambandha, and we're also focusing on Nitya Karma. Nitya is the eternal activity, so Nitya Sambandha, Nitya Karma, that is our focus, and as a consequence, when we use the word purification, we shouldn't get into the misconception of purification for the sake of purification. In other words, purification is the main objective. Purification is an objective, or rather means to an end, of cleansing ourselves from different misconceptions. What are these misconceptions called technically? The misconceptions and the identities and our desires associated with the other identities that we have established in the world are called anarthas, that which has no meaning. So anartha nivrti results in these misconceptions of different identities being put to rest, and then one reaches a conclusion about the specific mellow of service in the spiritual sky, and that is when they become fixed, nishta. So nishta follows anartha nivrti. So the point we are trying to make here is that the misconceptions being removed is our objective of purification. So what is it called? Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya. Bhagavatam's objective is to connect us to Krishna, to establish nitya sambandha, because Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, eternal service of Srimad Bhagavatam, being able to serve Srimad Bhagavatam by oral reception, results in an eternal connection, Nitya Karma. It results in Nitya Sambandha. It removes the misconceptions that are brought forth because we are in touch with passion and ignorance. And being in touch with passion and ignorance brings forth the misconceptions that we are different, we are something else, and we set objectives. You see, we need to understand this. Our dharma is going to be defined by the identity that we assume in this world. Our dharma is going to be defined by the identity that we assume in this world. As a consequence, when we focus on the identity of being a man, a woman, when we focus on the identity of being a professional, father, mother, etc., there is duty associated with the identity, which essentially means there's going to be energy being put into every one of those activities. If we don't understand who we are in relationship with Krishna, all these different identities will become the mainstay of life. And then we chart out a course in life that can practically become a distraction, because we would be spending years and years trying to resolve certain aspects of our life. Some people spend an enormous amount of time in just trying to ensure that they are professionally successful because they feel that that's a very important aspect of who they are. It might matter temporarily. To maintain body and soul, one needs to work. But can that be the overwhelming objective to the point where we become so distracted that it takes us away from Nitya Sambandha? So we have to be very careful with the objective of Krishna consciousness in assuming that Krishna consciousness is basically the idea or the means to an end in terms of purification. We are not interested in purification for the sake of being freed from material distress. That's why Jnana Mishra Bhakti is being thrown away by Srila Rupa Goswami, because the Mayavadis, the Brahmavadis, their objective is not to suffer. They basically worship deities, not to develop sambandha, they worship deities to purify themselves. So we want to be very careful that our objective is to develop sambandha when we come in touch with Radha and Krishna. Our objective is not specifically to simply purify ourselves. So be very careful with this conception of purification, because it can become very problematic if we start making it the whole and soul and life's objective when we come into Krishna consciousness. Yeah, we need to constantly find out that there is something called pravritti. We need to come in touch with Krishna's pastimes. We need to be encouraged by coming to the Dham. All of this is a part of it. So this clarification was brought forth. Then the personal forms were introduced. So the Purusha avatars were introduced in the second canto so that the personal form of the Lord could be understood. So we talked about Karanadokashai Vishnu, Garbhodakashai Vishnu, and then we spoke of Kshirodakashai Vishnu as well. Then we spoke about Leela. So we spoke about the different avatars. This was an increased level of Sambandha, very personal discussion about why the Lord appeared. And then we finally started with the questions that Parikshit Maharaj asked. The questions started with Lord Sri Narad Muni asking Lord Brahma, and then Brahmaji clarifying that my master is the doer and I'm merely an instrument. We briefly spoke about how being situated in the highest planet feels. Being situated in the highest planet in Satya Yuga is to be as free as possible from the lower modes of nature, which allows Lord Brahma to receive instructions and for him to execute the order of Krishna without being deluded by the lower mode of ignorance and passion, without which the amount of activity that he would do would overwhelm him. Imagine creating hellish planets. Imagine creating and being involved in arranging for souls of different kinds. So this kind of heavy duty activity in this material atmosphere can bewilder anyone, that includes Lord Brahma. So that is basically being discussed. Now, what is being talked of in the 9th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, very specifically, is where Sambandha Gyan is being decodified as to how Lord Brahma receives Sambandha. You see, we belong to the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. Because we belong to the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, a lot of emphasis is being laid out on the experiences of Lord Brahma, who is the primary teacher. And then from Lord Brahma, it comes to Sri Narad Muni, to Vyasadev, and then the disciplic succession comes all the way down to Srila Prabhupada, and then to our respective spiritual masters, etc. So this is the disciplic succession. Now, the point is, in the 9th chapter, there is a discussion that Lord Brahma is basically searching for answers. And whilst he is searching for answers, he also has darshan. This darshan of the Lord introduces faith in his heart, and then he hears 2 syllables. The 2 syllables that he hears is ta-paha. Tapaha. Tapaha means to perform penance. So he hears these syllables, and because he has seen the vision of the Lord, he understands that this is basically the instruction received by the Lord. So the Lord is wanting him to engage in tapaha. And what is tapaha? This is being explained in great detail by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur when he talks about Pancha Samskara. Pancha Samskara, or the 5 Samskara. Samskara, basically Samskara means an impression. This is an impression on the chitta. Chitta is consciousness. So when you engage in activity and when you perform a samskara, it leaves an impression, a subtle impression on consciousness to purify consciousness of certain misconceptions. This is why we use the word samskara. Samskara means basically to leave impressions. Now, Pancha Samskara fundamentally are the 5 different impressions or samskaras, rituals, and parts of bringing us closer and giving us Krishna Sambandha. This was the experience of Lord Brahma. It is followed by different sampradayas in different ways. We have our own following in terms of our own process. Yeah, different sampradayas have their own process of introducing, and I'm talking about Vaishnava sampradayas. Different Vaishnava sampradayas have the ability, basically introduce the concept of Pancha Samskara in different ways. So in our own sampradaya, the concept of Pancha Samskara involves few steps, and we will talk about it. The reason we are talking about it today is because the verse that describes Pancha Samskara in the Smriti Shastra, and Hare Krishna, can everyone go on mute, please? Yeah. The word that describes Pancha Samskara in Smriti Shastra, you see, the word the verse that describes Panchasamskara and Smriti Shastra, is part of what was given out in Bengali by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. It was later translated. So I'm just going to read the verse. The verse in Smriti Shastra talk about Panchasamskara in the following manner. Tapaha pundram tata nama mantro yagascha panchamaha amihi panchasamskaraha paramai kanti hetavaha. So, tapaha pundram tata namaha mantro yagas. 5. Panchamaha is 5. Tapaha, this is the word which Brahmaji hears from Krishna when he is searching for his identity. He hears the word tapaha. He says, if you want to know your identity as to who you are, you need to engage in tapaha. You need to engage in penance. Tapaha is to penance, to perform penance. Now, tapaha is also an impression of establishing an identity. So Lord Brahma engaged in 1,000-year penance, and this 1,000 years that he engaged in was the equivalent of a demigod's 1,000 years. Yeah, this is Lord Brahma's 1,000 years. It is not basically the 1,000 years of a human life. It is a demigod's 1,000 years. So he engages in 1,000 years of penance. In these 1,000 years of penance, he begins by first having an impression and instruction received from the spiritual master. Who is the spiritual master of Lord Brahma? Krishna is the spiritual master of Lord Brahma. So Krishna and his expansions, in this case, Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, because Brahma's origin is the Garbhodaka Vishnu. Lord Vishnu, who lies on the Garbhodaka ocean, he is the super soul of Lord Brahma. He is practically instructing him because from his navel, a lotus has sprung up, and from that lotus, Lord Brahma is basically situated in the lotus. Lord Brahma is searching for the origin of the lotus. He is trying to find out where I am, what is my identity, because he is Swayambhu. He is Swayambhu. He is born without, I would say, the very specific act of intercourse between a male and female. He is Swayambhu. He is born from the Lord, and as a consequence, he is searching for his origin. While he is searching for his origin, he hears the word tapaha. This is the first word. And this tapaha is followed by what is being given to him as the mantra. So he is initiated into the 18-syllable Gopala mantra, which is given to us during second initiation. And this Gopala mantra is the 18-syllable mantra. There are variants of this 18-syllable mantra. Gopakumar of Brihat Bhagavata Amrita was chanting the Gopala mantra, but he was chanting a 10-syllable mantra. He was not chanting 18 syllables. So there is a variation between 10 and 18, but the words are more or less the same with a few things being added and removed. Yeah, Lord Brahma receives the specific instruction of the 18-syllable mantra. This 18-syllable mantra that he receives is basically from Krishna himself, and this is the Gopala mantra. And this is practically the word mantra that is used in this description in Smriti. The Smriti says tapaha. One needs to engage in tapaha. One needs to engage in penance. Then there is pundram. What is pundram? Pundram is urdhva pundraha. Now this marking of tilak is pundram. This is urdhva pundraha. The marking of tilak in the 12 different places of the body is also a samskara of initiation. When the initiation process takes place, then there is a marking of tilak in the 12 different spots with Krishna's names. And this is basically also a part of the Pancha Samskara. And this introduces and increases Krishna Sambandha. And this is called Pundram. So there is Tapaha. So the first instruction, first part of Pancha Samskara is Tapaha, penance. Second is there is Pundram, marking ourselves with the marking of the Lord. Different sects in the Vaishnavas, different sampradayas, they have different tilak markings. And they all have their ideas. They have all got their own, significance. Even within the Gaudiya lineage, there are special, I would say, markings by different groups. And these are all completely bona fide because these are all coming from experiences of the lineage and acharyas, but there could be differences. In our situation with Srila Prabhupada and the Gaudiya Sampradaya, in other words, within our line, we use this, which is basically the lotus feet of the Lord, And then there is also Tulasi at the lotus feet of the Lord. This is basically how we use it. In the Sri Vaishnava line, they use two white markings and then there's a red to signify the worship of Sri, because Sri Sampradaya is all from Mother Sri Lakshmi, so they use a different kind of Urdhva Pundra. This is called Urdhva Pundra. This is basically to give us an identity that we are basically followers in the lineage which is leading to Krishna. This is to give us the samskara or impression at a subtle level. So what is being done on the physical level creates an impression in the subtle level. As a consequence, there's an impression on the chitta. When we wear tilak, we immediately identify with the process that we belong to Krishna. And as a consequence, we also identify with the identity of being in the process of wanting to surrender. So there is tapaha, there is pundra. Then tataha namaha. Nama can be taken into two different versions. Nama is the Harinama initiation that is given within our system. The Harinama initiation is where there is empowerment and connection given to the disciple by the Guru, and the Guru practically connects the disciple to the Parampara and then gives them empowerment to chant Harinam. This initiation process, the first initiation process, basically is something that was introduced by Srila Prabhupada, where there were first initiation and second initiation. Before that, Nama was given while the devotee was accepted by the Guru. So during Prabhupada's time with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, when Srila Prabhupada came in touch with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he instructed him to chant, X number of rounds. And that basically was how this whole concept of Nama began. But then the initiation which Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave Srila Prabhupada was the mantra initiation, by giving him a name and also giving him basically the initiation into the Gayatri. Yeah. So there are different variants, but I just want to clarify and just to be sure, Harinam, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, is completely self-sufficient to take us back to the spiritual sky and introduce us to the service that we belong to. We are completely dependent on Harinam. So have no doubts about the efficacy of the first initiation process or the giving of Harinam. Don't ever have any doubts about what Harinam initiation can do versus the second initiation process. Yeah, it is not mandatory. It is not mandatory to be involved in the second initiation process unless one wants to engage in Brahmanical Seva. There are so many wonderful devotees who engage in so many wonderful different sevas who are not initiated into the Gayatris. But they are particularly quite efficient in being able to execute their services in great efficiency. They're very dedicated, and they also have developed all kinds of attachment to Nama. So the point I'm trying to make is that we do not want to minimize the first initiation, because Harinam is completely and fully capable of taking us back to the spiritual sky and connecting us to the divine couple. So I have no doubts whatsoever. And then being connected to Srila Prabhupada through Harinam is as good a connection as being connected through the second initiation. Again, do not have any doubts. So we do not want to start thinking that one is better than the other. Neither do you want to start thinking that one needs to be in a Brahmanical service. Deity worship is very, very important, because deity worship, specifically when you are living on the planet, deity worship becomes very important because your senses need to be purified. For the purpose of understanding deity worship and for the different mantras, etc., and the processes that have to be done, then there is a need for certain empowerment for doing that, and that empowerment is basically achieved through the second initiation. There is definitely some help that is coming through because of second initiation in being able to engage in deity worship, and deity worship definitely assists immensely with progress in devotional service. Yeah. However, Harinam is fully capable of delivering us to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Radha and Krishna. So have no doubts. The second point we want to make is Nama also refers to the spiritual name that is being given at the time of initiation. Why is this being done? Because in Prabhupada's time, in Prabhupadaji's time, before when he was initiated, there was no change in the name until you got your Gayatri as well. One could be chanting Harinam and there would be no change in the name. But because Srila Prabhupada pioneered and he went to the West and he started initiating so many Western disciples whose names were not particularly connected to the Vedic paradigm, he wanted to introduce Nama so that they could start developing a very distinct identity of being a servant of Krishna. So the primary dasya, which was given at that point, Krishna Das, Krishna Dasi, that particular idea of being Krishna Das and Krishna Dasi was a samskara, because we, for instance, for many of us practically, the use of our spiritual name is more prominent in our lives than the use of legal names. I was just remarking to someone who I was talking to this morning, being in Vraja in Vrindavan, there's a cultural experience as well. A few months back in Vrindavan, I went to get what we would call a gas connection. In India, we have those LPG bottles, glass cylinders. So we have to go fill out a form. So it was quite interesting. I went to a local agency in Vrindavan, and I started filling out a form to get a gas bottle, the cooking gas cylinder. And I started filling out a form, and the guy who was assisting me, the agency man, he was telling me, you could either put your father's name or you could put your guru's name. Both of these are acceptable. So it was an amazing experience, because how often do you hear this in any other part of the world where the identity of being the son of your spiritual master is taken in a legal document to give you some kind of utility? There's a utility application. The utility application here in Vrindavan, they give you permission to use your guru's name. Yeah, they basically say you can use your guru's name. So this is basically a samskara itself. This in itself is a samskara. It was so wonderful just to hear that basically there's so much acceptance of the culture of Guru Sishya, the specific relationship between the father and son, or father and daughter. You see the spiritual connection between a spiritual son, spiritual daughter. It is practically that here it is reality. Here there is no confusion. Perhaps not so with other parts of India, but in Braj, in Vrindavan, they have no issues. Yeah, they have no issues whatsoever in being able to tell you that you can basically add your guru's name because he's your father, and they have this knowledge. So this is so amazing that they are not basically devotees. This person who was telling me was a Muslim. He was actually a Muslim, and he was actually telling me that you can add your guru's name. You don't need to put your father's name. I felt so exhilarated to be in a place where this identity of my being the son of my spiritual master, in other words, spiritual son, was given even more credence than my legal name. And this is basically what the Pancha Samskara is all about. Pancha Samskara is all about leaving impressions in our chitta, where we develop this identity of being connected to Krishna through his principle of Guru. In other words, it is the super soul who recognizes that we are ready to surrender, and he manifests himself in the physical form of a spiritual master. And we are motivated because we hear and we serve, and we are motivated to surrender. And then this motivation to surrender is also sambandha. This is facilitated by Sri Yoga Maya, and we surrender. And when we surrender, this is basically the beginning of our journey, you see. And this particular journey should begin with us establishing an eternal name. So the name is given to us. The name that is connecting us to Krishna is given to us at the time of initiation. This is one part of the word nama. So there is tapaha, there is a requirement for penance. Why is the word tapaha being used? Because when we first get in touch with devotional service, it is a penance. We are forced to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, as the case would be. We are forced to serve. We are forced to chant Harinam. We are forced to read. We are forced to associate, because there isn't a natural proclivity, natural taste for us to do anything to do with devotional service. Because there is no natural taste, it is called tapaha. Once it comes into spontaneity, raga marga, there's deeper attachment, because now I know who I am in touch with Krishna. Once I know who I am in touch with Krishna, there's deeper attachment. No one needs to wake me up. I get out of bed, I will chant, I will do as many rounds as I can, because I'm coming in touch with the name of my beloved. I would serve, I would read, because I want to know more and more about my beloved. You see, the point which I'm trying to make here is, The word tapaha, which is being used, is to indicate that there is a need for penance and there's a need for sacrifice. But this word for tapaha, for sacrifice and penance, etc., is because there is no spontaneity in the beginning of devotional service. Yeah. So there's tapaha pundram, the tilak, and then there is nama, which is the name given to us, and it is also the Harinam initiation, and then the mantra. The mantra referred to by Smriti Shastra here is distinctly the Gayatri mantra, and one of the Gayatri mantras is the Gopal Gayatri, the Gopal mantra. This Gopal mantra was given to Gopakumar by his guru. That was a 10-syllable Gopal mantra. Then this is an 18-syllable Gopal mantra. The 18-syllable mantra basically is the mantra which was given to Lord Brahma by Krishna. He meditated and chanted this 18-syllable mantra for 1,000 years. And because he was chanting this mantra for 1,000 years, he developed Krishna Sambandha. By increasing his Krishna Sambandha, he understood the desire of Krishna. Because once your Sambandha increases, you fall in love. Once there is love, there is the ability for surrender. Once there is love and surrender, then there is spontaneous devotional service. Then he was ready to receive instructions and to basically to learn to serve Krishna in the best possible, most conducive, natural manner. So this was given to him. And then for 1,000 years later, he became a proper servant. He basically started serving. So there is tapaha pundra tata nama mantro yaga. Yaga specifically refers to deity worship. So that's why deity worship is preceded by mantra. When we serve the deity of Radha and Krishna, those days, why did they use this word pancha samskara? And why was this particular verse in Smriti Shastra associated with deity worship? Was because a shaligram used to be given to the disciple by the guru. The guru would have worshipped the shaligram. The guru would have worshipped the shaligram. By worshipping the shaligram, the shaligram would start manifesting itself in such a way that Krishna's attributes of what the guru and Krishna's nature, it would start manifesting. The Shaligram Shilas basically is where the Lord is eternally present. The Shaligram Shila, the Lord is eternally present. But the Shaligram Shila can manifest to the extent to which the worshipper wants to have an interaction. So there is a natural, I would say, connection between the worshipper and the Shaligram Shila. So for example, do you remember reading in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that Srila Advaita Acharya Prabhu basically was worshipping a Narasimha Shaligram Shila. It is said that he was worshipping a Narasimha Shaligram Shila. Advaita Acharya Prabhu was worshipping a Narasimha Shaligram Shila, and this basically was done on the banks of Ganga in Mayapur to bring forth Mahaprabhu's descent onto this planet, to begin his preaching. So the point is, the powerful manifestation of the deity within the Shaligram Shila is dependent on the worshipper. So there is sambandha between the worshipper and the deity in the Shaligram, and as a consequence, the sambandha itself is passed on to the disciple when the deity is given by the worshipper to the disciple. This is yagya. This is basically the idea was to give sambandha gyan. The impression of giving a deity to the disciple was the guru has worshipped the deity. As a consequence, there is a sambandha, there is a connection, there is a relationship that is manifest between the guru and the disciple. And then that particular relationship is passed on, the information is passed on when the guru is giving the disciple the Shaligram Shila. We notice this in the Chaitanya Charitamrita when Mahaprabhu gives the Govardhan Shila to Raghunath Das Goswami. First, Mahaprabhu worships Giriraj. After worshipping Giriraj very, very seriously, then in the sense that worshipping Giriraj the way Mahaprabhu worshipped is not to be imitated because it was spontaneous. He used to basically smell him. He used to bathe him with his tears. He used to hold him to his heart. This was all basically his spontaneous actions in terms of Mahaprabhu. We cannot imitate because we need to follow Vidhi. And when we follow Vidhi, the actual natural relationship will also exist. This is to be understood. Yeah, different people start thinking that worshipping a certain deity means that you can worship casually. Giriraj can be worshipped casually. Shaligram should be worshipped with Soraso Upachara, 16 Upacharas. Deities should be worshipped with 16 Upacharas. The Upacharas, or the different 16 offerings that are made to the deity, are consistent for everybody. You can worship Giriraj at 16 Upacharas. It is formal worship. because we haven't really gotten to the place where we can be informal with him, like Mahaprabhu was. But while you engage in the 16 Upachara formal worship, as you have learned, many of you, during your second initiation training of worshipping the deities that you belong, in the yatras that you belong to, as you worship with second initiation, 16 Upacharas, the sambandha between you and the deity would start flourishing. And this flourishing of sambandha will basically bring forth a lot of experiences that are quite intimate. But you should continue having a formal connection. This is basically how it should be done. Because the Lord, if he manifests himself as a deity form, especially in the temple, he requires a formal worship of 16 Upacharas. Giriraj requires the same until you develop spontaneous bhakti. Raganuga bhakti essentially means that anartha nivritti is complete, and then we have developed sambandha gyan, we understand our mellow, and we are offering a service, and the spontaneity is being reciprocated by Giriraj. At that point in time, the devotee, for example, could worship in different ways. Mahaprabhu instructed Raghunath Das Goswami on the path of Raga Marga, the one that is Raganuga worship. He basically told him, offer him worship, which is offering him Tulasi Manjaris. Giriraj is offered Tulasi Manjaris. Then he instructed him to go buy the best of Bhoga from Jagannath's offerings. Because whatever is offered to Jagannath, you can offer the same to Giriraj if you're in Jagannath Puri. So that was also instructed. And Raghunath Das Goswami was facilitated by Swarup Damodar Goswami. Swarup Damodar Goswami basically used to arrange for the Bhoga. And Raghunath Das Goswami used to offer Tulsi Manjaris. And he used to worship Giriraj very, very carefully. Please understand this. Our Goswamis, the 6 Goswamis, they did not display Raganuga Bhakti for everybody to see. They kept it hidden. What they displayed was Vidhi. What did they do? They used to chant X number of rounds. Yeah? They used to interact very carefully with other Vaishnavas by paying obeisances. They used to be carefully worshipping the deities. So they didn't really make an open display of how they worshipped the deities in this Raga Marga, because that would be cheapening the whole process. They did not openly display it. They kept it hidden and they followed Vidhi, because that is what you should learn from the Sad Goswami Ashtakam. When you read the Sad Goswami Ashtak, you basically can understand how these exalted personalities behaved externally. External behavior, especially in the area of worship, etc., is very important if people are seeing. If you're at home and there is certain proximity with the deities, you could offer some things to him. You could sing certain songs. You could make some extra offerings. But until such time we are purified, it is better for us to maintain what we would call as Vidhi, because the spontaneity would also exist along with Vidhi. What is spontaneity with Vidhi? There will be great sensitivity that my deity is hungry. My deity needs to eat. My deity needs to be given new clothes. He needs to be given abhishek. There would be great spontaneity. If you don't see the spontaneity of wanting to serve the deity, which is actually spontaneity in Vidhi, where Vidhi itself improves to such a point where the anarthas of sleeping late and waking up late and not being able to do much for the deities, all of this disappears and we are serving the deities at home with great care because we are spontaneously attached to them and want to ensure that you're given the best of service. Then slowly, steadily, as that service improves, you will also receive very special sambandha between yourself and the deity. It would be revealed. So those interactions can be encouraged. Yeah, those interactions can be encouraged. The point which I'm trying to make here is there should be no unwanted display. There should be no unwanted display of deity worship, specifically in public, specifically even within ourselves, because it's whatever you do within your homes is what is going to come out, where there can be issues with regard to disturbance or lack of, I would say, understanding that is seen by others. It will be very confusing because most people worship according to Vidhi. So if they see behavior which is not appropriate, then they would basically start thinking that this is okay. And they would even question. So the point I'm trying to make here is Vidhi is important. And this yaga, which is being shown here, is basically the giving of the deity by the guru to the disciple so that the disciple could develop the deeper sambandha with the deity. Yeah? The sambandha of the guru is contained in instructions. So those of us whose guru has left for the spiritual sky, If you follow instructions, Krishna Sambandha is contained within those instructions. By executing those instructions, that Sambandha of the Guru will come upon us. When the Guru gave us beads during initiation, what did he instruct us? He told us chant 16 rounds, follow 4 regs. In that instruction, there's Krishna Sambandha. If we take it up seriously, then the Sambandha of the Guru with Krishna will descend to us when we take the instruction seriously that was given during initiation. So the point I'm trying to make here is this process of Pancha Samskara was experienced by Lord Brahma, not necessarily in the same way as we do. Ours is a process. For us, tapaha is not only the extraordinary process of sadhana bhakti, following vidhi, and then allowing the process of raga marga to come to its natural position after purification and qualifying it with shastric references. For example, Srila Raghunath Das Goswami makes a point in one of his writings. I forget the exact poem, but this is a Falashruti either in the praise of Sri Radhakund or it is a Falashruti in general. I forget the specific Falashruti as to which verse, which poem he was writing. He says that it is basically about the Dana Nivartana Kunda. It is the pastime of Dana Nivartana, where there is particular pastime around Sri Radhakund where taxes are demanded by Krishna and his cowherd boys for Radharani and her friends to pass and go across, you see. And while those taxes are being demanded by him, then there is basically a particular pastime that occurs which is considered extraordinarily beautiful, where Radha and Krishna, you would have seen those pictures, they are trying to basically negotiate. And then there is so much negotiation going on for Radharani to pass with the butter and milk, etc., with her friends. And Krishna and his cowherd boy friends, they are basically stopping them, saying, you need to pay taxes. That particular pastime is being described by our acharyas. There's a Falashruti, and in that Falashruti it is said that if one has no other desire in the world other than wanting to live in Vrindavan, they will see this pastime when they come to Sri Radhakund. Why is this statement being made by our acharyas? They saw the pastime. Whoever wrote that, Raghunath Das Goswami, he saw the pastime of Radha and Krishna having this exchange of Dana Nivartana in Sri Radhakund. And he writes a poem and he gives a Falashruti saying that if you have no other desires other than wanting to be in Vrindavan, to chant the name of Krishna, you will see this pastime. So how is it that we should understand whether we are qualified to see pastimes? How is it that we have to understand that we have reached a point of Sambandha where we are able to see different levels of interaction between the divine couple? We need to understand it by seeing whether when we come to Vraja, we go through the experiences of the acharyas. Doesn't it make sense? Someone has already documented their experiences. And we will learn if we are qualified, if we also go through those experiences. If we have experiences that are beyond or outside of what has been documented by our Acharya or Guru Varga, write them down, because we may not be there yet. We could be receiving some gift here and there, but it doesn't mean we are qualified enough. So we should basically be able to see what our predecessors saw. Please understand that this is a scientific process. If Krishna Sambandha is there, the cowherd boys should be seen. If you are a Saka, there should be interaction, but the interaction should fit in with what has been described in Shastra. The interaction should fit in with what has been described by Shastra. If Krishna Sambandha is there in Madhurya Ras, then you should be able to see the pastimes around Sri Radhakund, depending on our qualification. And if you are able to see, then you would know whether there are other desires in the heart other than wanting to be in Vrindavan and engaging in Harinam. So that is how we put ourselves through a litmus test, by looking at the descriptions of pastimes given by our acharyas and understanding if spontaneously, if one is engaging in the process of service, whether we have the ability to basically come in touch with such pastimes. That is how we qualify ourselves. So for us, the Pancha Samskara process is basically a process that brings us Krishna Sambandha. And at every stage, we need to follow the principles given by Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma's other name is Vidhi. His other name is Vidhi. So chapter 9 of the second canto talks about the experiences of Lord Brahma. His other name is Vidhi. What did he receive? He came and he engaged in tapaha. He engaged in penance, and he engaged in this penance, he engaged in this sacrifice, and by engaging in this sacrifice and in this penance, he basically chanted for 1,000 years. After chanting for 1,000 years, he basically understood he understood Krishna Sambandha. After chanting for 1,000 years, he understood Krishna Sambandha. He then was able to understand Krishna's plan, the blueprint, and then he was able to make progress. So do we understand the difference between us being able to enter into areas that are complicated and confidential without putting in the tapaha? So here, the first word given in Pancha Samskara is tapaha. Tapaha means you basically have to do penance. You have to develop the sambandha. There has to be purification like Lord Brahma went through. Then there has to be realization of our identity. Then there has to be service in that identity. Then we are asked to move on further and further and further. Then we need to test and see, are we there? We can find out how pure we are if we are given mercy on the banks of Sri Radhakund, we are given mercy in Vraja, and that mercy that's being given is also confirmed by our acharyas. That is the safest way to know of progress. Have we progressed? We should see if we have progressed by understanding whether there are pastimes which we can see which our acharyas have given. And this is basically a very truthful, sincere way to determine where we are in our progress in spiritual life. Now, so the verse again this is from the Smriti Shastra, Tapaha Pundram Tata Nama Mantro Yagascha Panchamaha. So Yaga is deity worship. And Prabhupada, he did not give us sambandha with different Shaligram Shilas. He basically said, I have established Radha Gokulananda, he established Randanishwara, he established different deities, and then he connected the disciples to the different deities and said, take care of their services. In this way, you will develop Krishna Sambandha. Yeah? So for us, it's the deities, but you can also have personal worship. But I was just wanting to emphasize that tapaha is what Sri Brahma had to go through. And we need to emphasize tapaha in our lives as well, so that we understand that we need basically to reach the point of qualifying ourselves so that we can enter into more sacred grounds. Then we would know that the Krishna Sambandha that we have received is basically, coming after going through the different stages of evolution. Yeah, the different stages of transformation that have to occur, they are spoken of by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in Madhurya Kadambini. It is also delineated by Srila Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So we know that there are different stages. It's all well documented. How do you know where you've reached? You'll have to go to what the acharyas have experienced. So it's a very scientific process. There really isn't any ambiguity, doubt as to where we are. We can know where we are. Yeah, that's where we are. So basically, this is the whole process that's given in the beginning of the second canto, second canto, ninth chapter. So we'll just read through the verses quickly, and we will conclude this chapter. We will read the first 12 verses translations for today, and then we will continue again as we go along. This is the chapter 9 is entitled Answers by Citing the Lord's Version. If you all remember, the previous chapter was all about questions by Parikshit Maharaj. This chapter is answers for Parikshit Maharaj's questions by citing the Lord's version. Sri Sukadev Goswami said, O king, unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. That relationship is just like a dreamer seeing his own body working. So here, he is qualified for the fact that if you think there's a relationship between you and your body, it is because the external energy, Krishna's Maya, the illusory potency, has created this physical body, and we are developing a relationship with this physical body. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has explained this very beautifully. He says that water has a certain dharma. What is the dharma of water? The water's dharma is to flow. It's fluid by consistency. The dharma of water is to flow. Now, the same water, if it is exposed to certain external influences, such as very low temperature, the water basically transforms itself into ice. Is there a difference between ice and water? Technically, there isn't a difference. It is a transformation of water due to an external influence. But no longer do we see a piece of ice as water. You see, when we look at a block of ice, we don't really call it water because the consistency has changed because of an external stimulus. If that block of ice stays as it is for a few years, it will again and again impress itself on our mind that it is just ice, it's not water. But even though the truth is, it's just water that has come in touch with low temperature and become transformed into ice. Yeah? So this is what happens to us. Because we have been in these physical bodies for so long, this transformation and coming in touch with something unnatural, such as this physical body, has practically convinced us that we are this physical body. In reality, it's difficult to not know that we are this physical, we are not this physical body. So this is nothing but the illusory potency of the Lord. And it is like living a dream because it will get destroyed. It is like water being transformed to ice. Water hasn't changed. It has come in touch with an external influence. But because the external influence and the transformation stays for some time, people start thinking that it is ice. We don't use the word water to describe a piece of ice. In reality, it is water. Yeah? So that's what is being spoken of here in this verse. That if you think that there is a relationship between this body and us, it is like being in a dream, and this is because of the external potency. The soul, which is pure, and Krishna is pure, but the soul, because of its nature, has come in touch with Krishna's external potency. And because of being in the external potency, it's now convinced it is this body. It's given this extraordinary explanation by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. There's a lot of clarity if you use that example. The illusioned living entity appears in so many forms offered by the external energy of the Lord. While enjoying in the modes of material nature, the encaged living entity misconceives thinking in terms of I and mine. This is basically anartha. Water transforming into ice, thinking it is ice, is an anartha. It is a transformation. Similarly, the soul coming in touch with different material bodies, different kind of identities, assuming that these are all my different identities, this is me, is an anartha. The process of anartha nivritti is to remove the subtle impressions left in our chitta, our consciousness, by all of the different places and the different bodies that we have been in. Yeah? Different bodies. Imagine, we have been in so many different bodies, and in every body we have engaged in so many different activities. We have eaten in a certain way, we have mated in a certain way, we have slept, and we have defended in a certain way. Yeah? All those impressions of eating, mating, sleeping, defending have been left on the chitta over millions of lifetimes. You can imagine the garbage and the distortion that is occurring in our consciousness. So it is no wonder that it's very difficult for us to come out of such misconceptions. But what is a miracle? The miracle is when we receive the Pancha Samskara, the process of tapaha, pundra, nama, mantra, yaga, by coming in touch with the pure devotee, then the impressions in our heart, which have been accumulated for millions of years, they start getting smashed to pieces. One day, I think it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj, or I do not know whom, they were walking with Prabhupada in New York City, and New York City freezes over like every other Western country in winter, and you have these small puddles of water, they form ice. So Srila Prabhupada used to enjoy his morning walks, but then he basically one day was carrying his cane and he was smashing each and every puddle that had basically frozen. He was smashing with his cane the puddles that had frozen, and he was shattering those little pieces of ice as he was walking. And he was explaining to devotees, saying, I will break down these misconceptions. I will break down the unwanted anarthas and the material conception that people have, the contaminations they have, just as I am shattering this. This is exactly what he did. By coming in touch with him, by nama, pundra, by the different aspects of spiritual impressions, these spiritual impressions have undone millions of years of wrong, confusing ideas that have been born by us coming in touch with physical bodies. It is very contaminating. It is an extraordinary contamination to be in any one of these bodies. Any one of these bodies. It is understood. When someone understands that their body is a contamination, they will understand someone else's body is a contamination. They will not desire someone else's body for sense gratification. Yeah, this is wisdom. Wisdom is when they understand their body is dirty, they will understand someone else's body is also dirty. It's a contamination. They will not desire sense gratification. Yeah, this misconception of sense gratification is where people even forget that their bodies are abominable. It's an extraordinarily contaminating experience for a pure soul to be encaged in one of these bodies. Unless these bodies themselves are used in the service of Krishna, this engagement is very contaminating. Imagine being millions of lifetimes of being encaged. And imagine being relieved of all of this by the mercy of Mahaprabhu. It is phenomenal. It is just phenomenal. We don't really think as to what we have been given. It is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. The process that we have been given is extraordinarily powerful. It's phenomenal. What's been given to us is something which is, I would say, is one of the most wondrous experiences and the most fortunate of experiences one can ever imagine. Is for an opportunity to understand that we are encaged. It is an opportunity to understand that we are encaged. As soon as the living entity becomes situated in its constitutional glory and begins to enjoy the transcendence beyond time and material energy, he at once gives up the two misconceptions of life, I and mine, and thus becomes fully manifested as the pure self. I and mine. Yeah? How often do we hear that as one becomes pure, they become more humble? Why do devotees who are advancing become humble naturally? They become humble naturally because there is no I and mine. There is a very, very deep and profound understanding that they are not this body. It's practical. It is not a conceptual understanding. It is not a concept in their mind. It's not theory. They really know that this is not the body. If someone spits at it, it's okay. You read about it in Srimad Bhagavatam. Rishabhadev, Jadabharata, Haridas Thakur being beaten up. For them, basically, this particular concept of I am not this body is reality. It's reality. It's not a theoretical precept that they need to process and then later they will come to this point. That's why a pure devotee can become very humble because they really don't have any material desires. As a consequence, they don't have the conception of being something in this world. So they don't feel like challenging someone else's position. And they are practically very humble because they don't have any identity. It is like someone being in a train compartment. We spoke of it the previous session. You know, how much are you going to fight with the fellow who is obnoxious, who is sitting next to you, when you know that you're going to get down in a couple of hours? How much are you going to fight with someone, you know, or how much are you going to complain if the seat is uncomfortable, if the journey is for 2 hours? When one understands that they're in a very temporary journey and they have to use, you know, make the best of a bad bargain, then they don't complain. They become very humble and accepting. This is Trinadapi Sunichena. So deeper chanting results in Trinadapi Sunichena, accepting the environment, becoming as humble as a blade of grass, becoming tolerant. All of these wonderful qualities exist in one who has the ability for deeper chanting of Harinam. So this is being shown here. This I and mine disappears. Yeah, it disappears. It really has no meaning. It has no meaning whatsoever. Gaur Kishodas Babaji Maharaj, who is known for his ability to renounce his vairagya, was extreme. It was extreme. This is not to be imitated, but it's to be appreciated. He basically was so against this whole concept of even coming in touch with material energy, materialistic people, that he used to sit in a toilet and he used to chant Harinam. And when I use the word toilet, I'm not talking about that with the seat, the European toilets that we use these days. It was an Indian toilet in the late 19th century. Yeah, it's an Indian toilet. We're talking about the Indian toilet where It can really be overpowering in terms of its the overall filthiness. He somehow felt that the filth of the toilet was much better than the filth in the hearts of people who are materialistic. Yeah, this is the vairagya, where basically the inconvenience to the body is not even experienced. He used to relish raw eggplant. Yeah, we call it eggplant in America, aubergine, I guess, in England. Yeah, he used to enjoy raw eggplant. He used to spice it with little pepper, salt, and he used to make an offering to Krishna, and he used to relish it as if this was the best thing that he could ever do. As if this was the best thing that he could ever do. Yeah, it was just fascinating to see how much disregard he had for the environment and for the body as well. How much basic disregard he had. It was quite fascinating to see how much disregard he had for the whole environment. How is this possible? Is it artificial? The answer is no. It was natural. It was natural because there was no conception of physical presence. I and mind were all gone. They had no conception at all. There was no conception. O king, the personality of God had been very much pleased with Lord Brahma because of his non-deceptive penance in Bhakti Yoga, presented as eternal and transcendental form before Brahma. And that is the objective goal for purifying the conditioned soul. Non-deceptive penance is being spoken of in this verse. Non-deceptive. What is the meaning of deceptive penance, which is the opposite? Deceptive penance is where there's mishra, intentions in the heart that basically are not very straightforward. There is penance, like for example, the penance of the demons. There's penance externally, there's a chanting of mantras, the intentions are particularly very deceptive. Yeah, very deceptive. So non-deceptive penance is where he sincerely wanted to establish sambandha. His objective was sambandha. He was not desiring anything else. He was practically wanting to establish sambandha. Because he was wanting to establish sambandha, the Lord gave him a glimpse of his appearance, his particular form. He saw his form. He saw the form of the Lord. And that particular form practically convinced him that he was in touch with Krishna, and he basically attained the goal. But this was before he received the mantra. Lord Brahma, the first spiritual master, supreme in the universe, could not trace out the source of his lotus seat, and while thinking of creating the material world, he could not understand the proper direction for such creative work, nor could he find out the process for such creation. He practically didn't know what to do. He was very bewildered. While thus engaged in thinking in the water, Brahmaji heard twice from nearby two syllables joined together. One of the syllables was taken from the 16th and the other from the 21st of the Sparsha alphabets, and both joined to become the wealth of the renounced order. The wealth of the renounced order, the wealth of the Brahmana is austerity. Tapaha. Ta is the 16th syllable, Pa is the 21st syllable, and in this particular way, Tapaha was actually spoken by Krishna, and Brahma heard this. Lord Brahma heard it, and this is the wealth of the renounced order. Yeah? Wealth of the renounced order. If you're Brahminical by nature, then it should be natural for one to perform austerities. If you are a Vaishya or a businessman by nature, you're thinking about money. Brahmanas are not very good at thinking about money. So one should understand who you are in the Varnashram. If you want to understand who you are in the Varnashram, think about what bothers you and what attracts you. If you are attracted by austerity and wanting to perform austerities and wanting to engage in services, wanting to engage in different kinds of worship, etc., and mantras, then you are a Brahmana by nature, where the concept of money doesn't come into the head. They're not efficient at all with administration, money, etc. They are good with Shastric study and performing austerities. If one wants to manage a place and there's propensity for dharma of managing, in the sense that there is passion enough for wanting to organize things for the betterment and for putting things in order and also taking control of circumstances so that things could be all right, then do understand that we are Kshatriyas. You have to see what is motivating us. If there is great interest in money, please be understood. Please understand that we are in the business class. If there's great interest in money, then it is business class. In other words, if money motivates you in life, then we can't call ourselves either Brahmanas or Kshatriyas. We belong to the order of the business class. We should be very clear in Varnashram. This is exactly how to identify Varna, is to see what motivates us. The Brahmana is not good with money. The Kshatriya basically needs money so that he could do some organizing. He may not be interested in the objective of money, but he wants to manage the situation. So he understands and appreciates resources. The businessman, on the other hand, he doesn't have vision. He does not have vision. The Vaishyas can't have vision. They don't have the ability to think beyond the transaction. As a consequence, you can't really expect them to have a beautiful vision of the future. It is the Brahmana's duty to have a vision. It is the Kshatriya's duty to organize such a vision. The Vaishya's duty to create wealth. The motivation for wealth should indicate to us that we belong to the business class. And there is really no need for us to feel bad or good about any of the Varnas. These are all vehicles. These are all different vehicles, and they have a role to play, but in itself, they have no, I would say, special place or advantage. There isn't. These are different Varnas. These are all vehicles. So these are all vehicles that can be engaged in the service of the Lord. That is how we should understand it. But the point is that we should understand our motivation. This is how we should understand our motivation. Shudras, if you're Shudra, then you can understand the motivation. How? We will become extraordinarily bewildered if the eating, sleeping, mating, defending position is being challenged in this world. There will be great anxiety if one doesn't know what to do about eating, sleeping, mating, defending. There'll be great anxiety. This is basically Shudra consciousness. So understanding who we are is important, because then we can plan for life. The Brahmana can plan for a simple life because he doesn't have rajas, he has no passion, so he shouldn't really be fooling around with a complicated setup which requires enormous passion to manage. The Kshatriya basically should recognize that they need to exercise their passion in assisting the organization of the movement's preaching. They should use that passion, otherwise the passion will degrade itself into the mode of ignorance. The businessmen should purify themselves by offering whatever they make in the service of the Lord. There's a certain formula. Srila Rupa Goswami used to advise 50% of what you make if you're a business person. There are many devotees who do this quite diligently. So it might not be surprising, but there are many devotees who do this very diligently. As of today, within ISKCON, there are many devotees around the world who contribute 50% of what they make. They make money, but they contribute 50%, and they do so very gladly, very happily. There are no qualms in giving money to the movement. Yeah? So the Shudra nature should also be understood. The Shudra nature is that if we find ourselves being very bewildered when the eating, sleeping arrangements are not being made properly, or rather, when we find that something is going wrong in life and eating, sleeping, mating is becoming challenging, and we become very bewildered, then we should understand that our consciousness is Shudra. Then what we must do is we must try our best to have some savings so that we don't go through the challenges that we would face that could disrupt our sadhana. So understanding the Varna requires some planning. The Brahmana should not have a complicated life because they can't manage complicated lives because they don't care. The principle of austerity is such that they don't want to spend energy in things which don't matter. For them, austerity is fine, challenges are fine, so it doesn't bother them because they're situated in the mode of goodness. It really doesn't bother them at all if something goes wrong in their life. As a consequence, they should simplify so that they don't need to put energy. That's why Brahmana means simple living. Brahminical living is simple living. Yeah? So this is basically how it should be organized. In other words, this understanding is that we need to know where we are going and we need to understand who we are and plan accordingly so that we can manage our psychology. Because there could be events in our life which might be so distracting because we find ourselves with complications. What is the Grahamedi conception? The Grahamedi conception is such that as devotees progress in life, they complicate their life. Big salary means bigger house, more cars, more loans, bigger mortgage. So what happens when the salary becomes challenging, or when the economy changes, which happens invariably because that's the world we live in, then there's great anxiety in the house. Instead, if we recognize that our nature is to panic, then we can keep a surrounding or a lifestyle which is uncomplicated. So this way, we don't hit the panic button. For all of us, practically, for all of us, having a Brahminical outlook is good for us. Meaning, we basically try and simplify so that we don't put energy. This particular planning is good for us because eventually, over a period of time, we're going to purify ourselves to reach that point. So eventually, it's better to uncomplicate life. It's better that way. Yeah, because we can't manage if we are in the wrong varna. That's why we speak so much about being in the right varna, understanding our nature. It's very important. Understanding a nature, and understanding a nature should be simple. It need not be whether I should choose this job or that job. It can simply be what motivates us and what is our psychology. Are we going to be bewildered if some change occurs? If change occurs and we're going to be bewildered, then we need to manage the change. We also want to understand that eventually we have to get to the Brahminical platform. Because we have to get to the Brahminical platform, it's better to plan for the Brahminical platform, to simplify so that we don't get bewildered. Yeah? So we need to understand that this is basically going to be a long-term plan of trying to uncomplicate life so that we don't get bewildered as time goes on. So this is very important for us. Constantly keep life at such a level that if tomorrow there is a challenge, it doesn't bewilder us. It's going to allow us to continue our sadhana. We wait for better times, then we can maybe add some resources for ourselves. Yeah? This is basically tapaha. Tapaha is the wealth of the brahmanas. It is also the wealth of the devotees. Tapaha cannot be performed with too much distractions. There is a need for simplicity. So there's some simplicity required. And simplicity, as a definition, is different for different people. For me, simplicity could be very little activity in the material world. For some others, simplicity could be that they can handle some reasonable level of activity and a reasonable level of complication. So simplicity for different people is different, but it is always a matter of whether we're going to be bewildered. Yeah? So it is always better to target a level of simplicity where great thought needn't be put in the prospect of eating, mating, sleeping, defending, which can practically derail the path of sadhana bhakti. We have to be careful about that. Yeah, we have to be very careful about just that part. That in turn would assist us in being able to move forward. Because the more artificial the arrangement, greater would be the challenge. If you can't maintain it, it's an issue. Yeah? So that's what is being spoken of by tapaha. So he heard the word tapaha. Tapaha means to engage in austerities. When he heard the sound, he tried to find the speaker, searching on all sides. But when he was unable to find anyone besides himself, he thought it wise to sit down on his lotus seat firmly and give his attention to the execution of penance as he was instructed. He tried to find out more, but he said, this is what I have been given. This is basically his understanding of 9.22 of the Bhagavad Gita, that you have been given. Krishna carries what you lack and he preserves what you have. Lord Brahma understood, I have been asked to do tapas, I will do tapas. I will engage in tapasya. That's it, because this is the instruction that I've been given. Because what's going to follow would naturally follow if I follow this instruction. So what happens next? Lord Brahma underwent penances for 1,000 years by the calculation of the demigods. He heard this transcendental vibration from the sky, and he accepted it as divine. Thus he controlled his mind and senses, and the penances he executed were a great lesson for the living entities. Thus he is known as the greatest of all ascetics. So he meditated on the Gopal mantra for 1,000 years because he heard the word tapasya, he heard the mantra, he just took the mantra and he practically started because he didn't question as to, in terms of no other questions were asked. He knew that that was going to lead to something more. The personality of Godhead, thus being thus very much satisfied with the penance of Lord Brahma, was pleased to manifest his personal abode Vaikuntha, the supreme planet above all others. This transcendental abode of the Lord is adored by all self-realized persons freed from all kinds of miseries and fear of illusory experience. So Vaikuntha planets first came. Lord Brahma was able to see the Vaikuntha planets. In reality, if one advances in spiritual life and Krishna Sambandha increases and their consciousness has risen to the highest levels, has even risen to the level of the Satyaloka, which is the highest level of the mode of goodness, they will have the ability to have direct visions of the demigods. They will have the ability to directly see the manifestation of celestials. They will. It's very easily available. It is accessible to them because their consciousness has gone to that level of the universe. Does it make sense? Internally, the consciousness has risen to this celestial level. It has gone beyond and reached the level of, let us say, Tapaloka, Maharloka, Tapaloka, Janaloka. Then there will be visions and communication with the residents of such places. This is actually a very, I would say, normal process of evolution. So there's a lot of information that becomes available. In that personal abode of the Lord, the material modes of ignorance and passion do not prevail, nor is there any of their influence in goodness. There is no predominance of the influence of time. So what to speak of the illusory external energy? It cannot enter that region. Without discrimination, both the demigods and demons worship the Lord as devotees. Now, in the case of Lord Brahma, he had transcended, his consciousness had transcended because of the chanting of the Gopala mantra. Krishna appears as the Gopala mantra. When he comes in touch with Krishna as the Gopala mantra, he practically is initially getting a vision of the Vaikuntha planets and then developing a deeper sambandha of the 3/4 of Krishna's existence. 3/4 is spiritual, 1/4 is material. 3/4 is now being visible to Lord Brahma. Yeah? And in that part of the world, in the Vaikuntha planets, there is no influence of the time factor. There is no such thing as 6 kind of transformations: being born, growing, maintaining our stature. Then there is basically dwindling, destruction begins, then there's annihilation. Yeah, this transformation, 6 different types of transformations that occurs in our physical bodies and the physical planets of the material world is not seen in the Vaikuntha planet. There is no time factor. There is no presence of external energy. The mode of goodness there is pure, Shuddha Sattva. Shuddha Sattva. Here it is Mishra Sattva. Mishra is mixed with passion and ignorance. The higher and higher you go in the process of anartha nivritti, higher and higher are you ascending to the mode of goodness. If you reach the highest point of this material universe, you are in the highest mode of goodness, but you're also in touch with passion and ignorance, but imperceptible levels. Imperceptible levels. It is not perceptible. It is there, but it is still not very perceptible. Predominantly goodness. Once you cross the material sky and go into Vaikuntha, there is no influence of ignorance. If there is no influence of passion and ignorance, there is no destruction. There really is no destruction. The inhabitants of the Vaikuntha planets are described as having a glowing sky bluish complexion. Their eyes resemble lotus flowers, their dresses of the yellowish color, and their bodily features very attractive. They are just the age of growing youths. They all have 4 hands. They are all nicely decorated with pearl necklaces, with ornamental medallions, and they all appear to be effulgent. Yeah, they all have 4 arms, and yeah, it's basically wearing yellow dhoti like Krishna, and then beautiful features, bluish, and so on. These are the Vishnu Dutas, basically the servants of the Lord in the Vaikuntha planets. Some of them are effulgent, like coral and diamonds in complexion, and have garlands on their heads, blooming like lotus flowers, and some wear earrings. The Vaikuntha planets are also surrounded by various airplanes, all glowing and brilliantly situated. These airplanes belong to the great Mahatmas, or devotees of the Lord. The ladies are as beautiful as lightning because of their celestial complexions, and all these combined together appear just like the sky decorated with both clouds and lightning. Because clouds are darkish blue, the males are darkish blue, the women are lightning colored, so you have lightning mixed with darkish blue when you look at the men and women, the servants of the Lord and the residents of the spiritual sky. The goddess of fortune, in her transcendental form, is engaged in the loving service of the Lord's lotus feet, and being moved by the black bees, followers of spring, she is not only engaged in variegated pleasure, service to the Lord, along with her constant companions, but is also engaged in singing the glories of the Lord's activities. Lord Brahma saw in the Vaikuntha planets the personality of Godhead, who is the Lord of the entire devotee community, the Lord of the goddess of fortune, the Lord of all sacrifices, and the Lord of the universe, and who is served by the foremost servitors like Nanda, Sunanda, Prabala, and Arhana, his immediate associates. We will go into this verse number 15 from the following week. But now Lord Brahma's consciousness has reached the Vaikuntha planets, and he's having a vision of the Lord and his associates. See, this is a description of the increased level of Sambandha. As he chants the Gopala mantra, his Sambandha with Krishna increases, and he is actually transcending from material consciousness, which is basically the mode of goodness, contaminated by good passion and ignorance, and he's going into Shuddha Sattva, where there is no contamination. He starts seeing the spiritual sky. He starts seeing the residents of the spiritual sky. He also starts seeing the vision of the goddess of fortune, and he's seeing the Lord now with his associates. This is increased levels of Sambandha. This is the increased levels of Sambandha. So we will continue this session, this discussion in the following week. We'll stop here. We're stopping at verse 15. We will continue from verse 15 onwards. I can take some questions. So we basically wanted to touch upon Sambandha, and here we saw the process of how the bewildered soul represented by Lord Brahma is unbewildered by coming in touch with instructions of the spiritual master, who is Krishna himself, who instructs him to chant a certain mantra, gives him a vision of himself, initiates him into the mantra, instructs him on the chanting for 1,000 years. And as he completes bhajana kriya, the anartha nivritti of not knowing and being in ignorance slowly melts away, and Krishna is manifest to him in the Vaikuntha planets. That is a specific form of the Lord. We'll learn more in the following session. But this is practically similar to what we go through. So we started out by discussing the Pancha Samskara. We spoke about the fact that Samskara is impression, and our impressions have been millions of lifetimes of being encaged in this body. Each and every time you do something, there's an impression caused in our chitta. Imagine millions of lifetimes of impressions. All of that gets extinguished when we come in touch with faith. The spiritual master introduces faith into our heart, Adav Shraddha. He instructs us on the mantra. He instructs us on wearing the Urdhva Pundra, the importance of the tilak. He then gives us instructions of tapaha. Yeah? In Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, tapaha is to wear the names of Radha and Krishna, literally impressions of Radha and Krishna on the body in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. In the Sri Sampradaya, tapaha is to actually be impressioned by hot irons. You know, they will have these hot branding irons. They have a branding iron which is the shape of a conch, and a branding iron which is in the shape of the discus of the Lord, the chakra. And they put it on either shoulder. This is basically the first initiation. As far as they're concerned, this is the first initiation. The branding is done. This is called tapaha, where the soul basically receives the symbols of the Lord and is engaging in penance, because that austerity of pain of being branded, and branded as a, you know, like we use the word, being branded to belong to someone. Yeah, animals get branded. Yeah, that they have certain branding done to the animals, so they belong to a certain form. In a similar fashion, the devotees in the Sri Sampradaya literally brand themselves during initiation. Yeah, literally brand them, to brand ourselves the names of Radha and Krishna. But how was the branding done? It was done through tilak paste. You know, you put the names of Krishna and Radharani through tilak paste on the body, in the chest. Sometimes, you know, we write the mantras, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, for example, putting Radharani's name, Krishna's name on the body itself. Yeah, this is basically done on the body. Now, the point which I'm just talking about is this is tapaha. Tapaha also has the meaning of performing austerities after initiation, basically engaging in Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. We spoke about the difference of Vaidhi and Raga Marga, and the danger of stepping into Raga Bhakti without completing the purification given by Vaidhi. Even if you want to enter into Raga Marga, spontaneity will come first. It should manifest in Vaidhi. It should manifest in service. It should manifest in chanting. It should manifest in engaging with the deity, spontaneity in service and everything else. And then automatically one has the ability to, enter into understanding deeper aspects of coming in touch with those who are spontaneously attached. So those who have deep attraction to Radharani and Krishna, when you hear from them, then there's motivation for us as well. That is also taken in as one of the ways we develop deeper attachment. So to enter into spontaneous devotion, one needs to come in touch with those who are already in spontaneous devotion. Hearing from them would introduce a greater level of enthusiasm. But the point is that we need to first approach all of this through the process of Vaidhi Bhakti. Yeah? So we will stop here, and then we will take questions before we conclude the session.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, this is Hemagopika Dasi. Please accept my
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, text 4 says that the personality of God had been very much pleased with Lord Brahma. Because of his non-deceptive penance, he presented himself before Lord Brahma. And in text 5, it says that he could not understand the proper direction of such work, nor could he find out the process of such creation. What's the link between these two verses, Prabhu? I couldn't follow it in a regular manner. I'm not really
right.
sure.
It is not structured. So he presented, this is basically a description. This is basically a description of the goal much before it occurs. And then they're describing the process to attain such a goal as we go further. Does it make sense?
I see. Okay. Then,
Yeah.
Prabhu, so as you explained, it is that Brahma engaged himself in Bhakti Yoga.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the tapa, for 1,000 years. Chanting the
Yes.
mantra, Bala mantra. And then he was able to see the Lord, transcendental form of the Lord.
Yes.
Is it so true? Okay. Okay, Prabhu, thank you so much. I have one more question, but I'll allow others to ask first.
Why don't you go first? No, because I'm still waiting for others, so you could just finish this.
Okay. Okay, Prabhu. And in the 10th verse, he says that Brahma explains that, sorry, Prabhu, without discrimination, both the demigods and the demons worship the Lord as devotees. In that personal abode of the Lord, why is he specifying demigods and demons? Why is he, well, there will be not such a difference, right?
Well, basically, they are talking about the fact that it is accessible regardless of where you come from. So there's Bali Maharaj, there's Prahlad Maharaj, they belong to the class of demons. And then there are those who are also the demigods. So even though they were divided in terms of who they were, in terms of their identities in the material world, once they reach the spiritual sky, there is no difference, is what they're trying to convey here.
Okay, so just to explain us, he's
Yeah.
just different. Okay, thank you so much, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Such a wonderful class. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you. Any other question, comment? Okay, I'm just going to read a question that's come on chat, and then I'll take what's coming up. If my understanding is right, that when I'm chanting, it's still austerities, tapa. And only when I'm purified completely will my chanting become devotional service to Krishna. Basically, I want to understand the difference between tapa, which is voluntarily accepting difficulty in devotional service, which is blissful. So, okay, so the basic difference is that, yes, for us, the sadhana and the sadhya are the same. So in that sense, when we engage in the chanting of Harinam, initially, we are being forced to follow the principles of complete 16 rounds, complete X number of rounds given by the spiritual master. So while we engage in the chanting of Harinam as given by the spiritual master, it might not come out of our personal motivation where we are motivated to chant Harinam. But then as the purification process occurs and the Anartha Nivritti process basically propels us and removes the influence of the lower modes of nature, then we are able to chant spontaneously as we want to. There's a reflection of spontaneity even in the chanting of Harinam, right? There's a reflection of spontaneity. When you read the history about Mother Hladini, there was a small book written about the Prabhupada disciple, Mother Hladini. She was a Bhava Bhakta. She was in Bhava. According to my spiritual master, he was so motivated by her that he encouraged his disciples basically to keep a picture of her on the altar. This was a Srila Prabhupada disciple. And Mataji actually passed away under very unusual circumstances while preaching in Africa. She was actually assassinated by, I would say, the civil war. And there were so many other things that were happening in West Africa that she practically gave up her life while preaching. This was a Prabhupada disciple. And basically, this Mataji, while she was serving in New Vrindavan, she was just one person managing the deity kitchen, deity service, everything else. And as a consequence, she basically used to wake up at 2 o'clock, but the waking up process was spontaneous. It was jumping out of bed rather than, oh, my spiritual master has asked me, so I must get out of bed and chant. So there's a difference between the spontaneity of jumping out of bed out of enthusiasm. So we should notice that spontaneity in wanting to engage in sadhana bhakti as well. Yeah, that spontaneity should be seen by us. So that's the point. So it will come slowly and steadily as we make progress. And that is how we will understand that we're progressing from tapaha, which is austerity, which is being done to involuntarily because someone else has asked for it. So there's vidhi, we are following rules and regulations, to a point where we are doing it voluntarily because we love to do it. That's the difference. Why should we engage in tapaha when Krishna can only be understood by devotional service? The idea of tapaha is fundamentally to purify ourselves, especially if you're living in the West. The senses can become impure very easily because we come in touch with objects that are not related to Krishna quite spontaneously. Because the Western countries in general, you don't really come in touch with Krishna everywhere. It's very difficult. As a consequence, the senses can become contaminated because you can come in touch with many things while you live there, which might not be related to Krishna. So when we engage in constant reminding ourselves we're servants of Krishna, we have to engage in a lot of service. So this is tapaha as well. Yeah, tapaha is all about being able to remove the influence of the mode of ignorance and passion and introduce and emphasize the mode of goodness, the positivity. That's what we need to do. So there's a question from Jay. When you say there is no time factor in the spiritual sky, do you just mean that time doesn't have any effect on the spiritual body? Or is time not a variable in the spiritual sky? When there's space, there has to be time. Yes, there is no effect. There is no effect whatsoever because the time factor, as we call it here, as supreme time, is that which directs the modes of nature to go from the process of creation to maintenance to eventually destruction. So there isn't the influence of the time factor as we see it manifest in this particular realm. There is no influence that can practically destroy anything. Krishna is the time factor here, where there's transformation, constant transformation. There is no destruction, because destruction occurs due to the mode of ignorance. There is no presence of the mode of passion and ignorance. It's pure goodness. As a consequence, there is no destruction whatsoever. It doesn't mean there isn't a variegated existence. It simply means that there is no destruction. Yeah? There's a lot of variety of how to engage in life and what life is in general. Okay, is there any other question or comment?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, can I ask the question? One more question.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
It is specified that 5 kinds of miserable conditions, and within that, absorption is the last one. Why is absorption a miserable condition, Prabhu? I couldn't understand that. How should I understand?
I'm sorry, which verse are you talking about?
Verse number 10. On page
One,
453 in Bhagavatam, it is specified.
one moment.
Yes, good.
I'm searching for the exact word because I'm using an iPad. I'm using an iPad, so
the material body is overcast with 5 kinds of miserable conditions, namely ignorance, material conception, attachment, hatred, and absorption.
Absorption basically is in the particular idea of having an identity that is associated with the material body. Yeah. Yeah, it is just that the idea of being absorbed in this. You can see this specifically if you sometimes we notice pigs in Vrindavan. You will find the pigs in the sewer, immersed in sewage water, but they will be so absorbed in that particular life, even though there's misery all around them. You see, you can find out. You can basically see it manifest as well.
Okay, Prabhu, thank you.
Sure.
Prabhu, 2 more questions. Can I go ahead?
Yeah, please do that. Yeah. I'm not using the book, so if you can give me, if you
Yes.
have specific questions, yes.
Yes, Prabhu. It's in the same text purport. Since the nature of that region is unlimited, there is no history of such association, nor is there end of it. Again, it's in the purport of text 10.
Yes.
Oh, the specific phrase is, there is no history of such association. I couldn't understand that, Prabhu. I don't know.
There is no history, yeah. There is basically the associated members, they're free to go everywhere. There's no limit to such creation, particularly in the region of the 3/4 magnitude. Since the nature of the region is unlimited, there is no history of such association, nor is there an end to it. Basically, there is no such thing as a manifestation of when it began and when it ends. Yeah, so they don't even perceive. See, here, we all have a distinct idea in terms of each and everything as to when it begins and when it ends, our existence. Here, there is no history. There really isn't any kind of basically a history of when it began and when it is going to end in terms of the unlimited existence. You have to make a comparison between our existence in the planet here, in the material world, where it has a beginning, which is very structured, very defined, and it ends. And there it is unlimited in terms of when, how, and everything else which they do. And there is no association or history of where things began. Nature of the region is unlimited, so there is no history of such association, nor is there an end to it. Yeah, does it mean that, for example, if you move from the America to Mayapur, you can say I came on the 1st of June. Yeah, and before that you were in America. There is here in the Vaikuntha planets, they are engaging in perpetual devotional service of the Lord. And there is really no such thing as a beginning and an end. As a consequence, there is no such thing as when things began and when things are going to end. Yeah, there is no history. Does it make sense to you? It's a little bit, I would say, abstract. What I will explain now, it's a bit abstract, but they're talking about the nature of existence in the spiritual sky is such that there is no history. History essentially means that there was an instance which occurred before, and there is an instance occurring now, and there's an instance occurring in the future. For them, there is no such thing as an instance that occurred before. They don't even have an idea as to when such existence began. So if you ask a Vrajavasi, who is Krishna, his close associates in Vrindavan, as to when their association with Krishna began, they would basically have no answer. They wouldn't really have an answer as to when it began. Neither would they have an answer in terms of where and when it is going to end, because it is unlimited. The association is unlimited. Does it make sense? It is just an abstract idea where there isn't a beginning, there isn't an end. It is the nature of time. That's what they're trying to convey here.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. So even in the case of one more example is, this is particularly talking about going somewhere. Say, for example, you explore Govardhan. the hill, the region around Govardhan here, just to give an example. And let's assume that you went for a parikrama and you marked each and every spot. You went for 2 years worth of parikrama, 3 years worth of parikrama, 4 years worth of parikrama, and then you've gone to different places, etc. And then this is basically where there was already an understanding that these are all different places that you've been to in Govardhan. And you basically will reach a conclusion that there's nothing more to see. Yeah? But in the spiritual sky, it's unlimited in terms of its scope. And as a consequence, there is no recorded history either as to something that existed and where you could go, etc. So there isn't any such recorded history because it's unlimited. So when you talk about, for example, a definition of something which is infinite, how do you define infinite space? Because there is the ability for you to practically go anywhere in an unlimited fashion is what they're trying to refer to. It's a bit abstract, but it is. I'm just trying to distinguish the two. Here you can quantify it and reach a conclusion that I've covered everything. There you can't because it's unlimited. And there is no recorded history because it is unlimited either. Okay, I think I'll just take one question and then we're going to end the session. I have 5 more minutes. Okay, so we'll end today's session and we'll meet again the following week. And we'll continue with verse 15 onwards. If there are questions from 1 through 15, you could reach out to me and we will try and address those questions either in the session that is coming forth, or I will just post the answer in the group itself. Yeah. So thank you very much for joining me. Shri Prabhupada ki jai.